I'm going to change the presenter to you. Now, theoretically, we should see whatever is on your screen.
Tell me
There you go.
So all you have to do is start sharing your screen.
Looks like he is sharing it already.
I believe I am. Do you see my son?
I don't see.
Yes.
No, I don't.
Okay. You don't see it. Okay.
I do not see it. Everyone else sees it?
Yes, I do.
Weird. Oh,
You see
there
my
it is.
PowerPoint?
Okay, go for it.
Awesome. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Kristian Aloma. I'm a student at Fielding. I don't know how much Jason has said about me. I'm hoping I have about a year. Jason is my advisor and first chair. But of course, as I'm sure you all know, life often gets in the way. So I pretty much always say there's about a year left whenever anyone asks me. And that's just become my default answer. So it's a moving timeline. But I've been asked to talk about storytelling. And I believe Jason wants me to talk about the way we've started using storytelling in my office and the way I'm kind of thinking of storytelling on a broader scale. Is that right, Jason?
That's it.
Awesome. So I've got a deck I'm going to walk everyone through, and I'm going to go full screen, so hopefully it doesn't mess anything up. Can you all still see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Wonderful.
Yes, sure can.
All right. So I work for an organization here in Chicago, a marketing consulting firm called Brand Trust. I'm a partner at the firm now, and we specialize in overall bringing the social sciences to marketing, sort of at a very sort of basic level. So we conduct market research using a technique that if you were to watch it and you had no clue what it was beforehand, you'd just pretty much think it was a therapy session, a clinical therapy session. We ask research respondents to close their eyes and visualize experiences from their past related to topics that our client is interested in studying, so be it soda or cancer or shipping, overnight shipping, things like that. We have people sort of go through memories from their past and describe those memories and tell the stories of those memories to us. And, you know, there's an element to it, and we describe it as a narrative technique, and it is technically a narrative inquiry technique. And the way it works is that when they tell us the stories of their memories, when we do that across 30 respondents, which is typically the sort of size of a project that we might do a market research study on, we can start to see patterns in the stories, patterns in the narrative that they've shared with us about each of their memories. And in those patterns, when we probe and we explore, we can also begin to identify the emotions and their relationships with different things and their relationships with different products and things like that. So we use it sort of at a core level as sort of just the grounding of our organization. Now, I've, through my work with Jason and work that we've been doing at Brand Trust, have developed sort of some storytelling services, you could call them, for our organization. One of those we do is just sort of straightforward storytelling training, it's called. And so I will go to clients and train them, and I have most of my clients are in the market research industry, and I will train them in storytelling techniques so that they become not necessarily better public speakers, and there's certainly training and courses you can take that's related to that, but they become better storytellers. And a better storyteller is really powerful within an organization because in the organizations I work with, it tend to be sort of, they trade in ideas more than product, things like that. Stories become one of the best ways for an idea to spread throughout the organization. And so if they become better storytellers, they in turn become essentially more popular, more heard, more listened to. They are able to sort of more greatly influence and direct an organization because of it, things like that. So we train them in these techniques and these services I am also sort of trying to push this further within the organization and also in my dissertation to seeing how far we can take narrative theory when it comes to understanding branding in general, or just simply sort of the commercial marketplaces in general, or more broadly, if you will. So what I've got here is sort of a brief background on the way that we train our clients, and then I'm going to sort of open it up and, for the most part, kind of speak extemporaneously on the thoughts that I have and the focus that I'm taking, I believe I'm taking, in my dissertation. I'm writing the written QE at the moment, and we'll be submitting that to Jason hopefully by the end of next month, and getting that all wrapped up. So, brand trust, one of our taglines here, and I'll say, since I can't see everyone and we're not in person together, so if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me at any point. I am happy stopping and comfortable stopping if you've got questions and thoughts and comments. And I know we've got an hour and I already came late, so I apologize for that again. So at Brand Trust, one of the sort of core things we believe is that every brand is a story. And what we mean by that is when people engage with products, with companies like Apple iPhones and things like that, those brands, to a certain extent, help tell stories about us. And the brands themselves, the organizations that manage them, also tell stories about those brands. And so essentially, we are sort of engaging and trading stories in a commercial world, in a commercial sense. And so we will often adopt and purchase things of which, or whose narrative that we want to integrate into our own, of whose narrative we want other people to sort of hear about us. For example, the iPhone, I'm an Apple Mac fanboy, if you will. I'm a Mac addict. And so there's a narrative that surrounds essentially sort of the Apple brand that appeals to me. And I find I like, and it sort of is parallel with an identity that I want to portray, and things like that. And there's also elements when we think of pharmaceuticals where there are narratives that certain drugs take on that integrate into the narrative of my life. So we study a lot of cancer patients, and one of the things we hear about cancer patients is that they turn to the therapies that they take, right, the chemos and the other therapies, and they sort of become weapons in some cases. In other cases, they become shields. And so these therapies that are branded therapies that they are, in some cases they have relationships with them for the rest of their lives, they become, in some cases, props in their own personal narratives, in their own personal stories they tell about themselves, about their battle with cancer, things like that. So we try to help clients understand their brand story so they can better manage that story. They can tell a better story and hopefully a more helpful story for their clients. One of the, I think, important ideas that I've uncovered from the literature reviews that I've done so far in my papers is this quote here from one of the articles, that a brand story with high authenticity, clear plot, and told by the first-person narrator tends to be perceived with more positive brand image. And one of the things I took away from this idea, right, is that essentially what he's saying is that when a brand or a product has a clear narrative to it, has a clear story to it, people like it better. People connect with it more deeply. They just seem to resonate with things that have that. And it's, the study itself was sort of looking at the way just simply information was presented or content was presented about a product or a brand, in some cases a vacation, and comparing it to when you can present things as a list or when you present things as a story, and people connected with those stories more. And it's just probably one of the universal rules you're picking up from your courses with Jason, and that idea that essentially people love narratives. People love stories, regardless of what kind it is or how it's being played out. The reason being, and this is something probably you know by now, is that stories are human 101. That's how we call it. That's sort of the core way people work and think and make meaning of the world is through story. And there's sort of two components to this, and I get this a lot in my clients, is when I'm training them in storytelling, they say, well, do you mean that you want us to get up in a presentation and tell a story like once upon a time, blank? And in some cases, yes, there's an important role in just simply telling the story. But there's also a side to storytelling, or what is more sort of probably academically called narrative theory, that is about the way human beings essentially think and operate, in that we use a story structure to understand the world, to make sense of the world. And it is in that, and sort of the brain's just inherent thirst for story, that we become kind of completely immersed in it. And one of the quotes I love from one of the books I read on this is that in many ways, storytelling to human beings is like water to fish. Is that you are so surrounded by it, you are so completely immersed in it, you are so almost always using it, that it's very difficult to understand story, to identify story, to recognize story around us because of how much it is just simply around us at all times. And that's why some children's first words are among their first words is often, Daddy, tell me a story, Mommy, tell me a story, because the brain thrives on it. And the brain is learning the structure, and children are sort of beginning to develop and understand that story structure, where oftentimes adults are actually better storytellers than they realize because of how sort of inherent it is into the way that we communicate and connect with one another. And if you've got nephews or young children like I do, I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and they come up to you and sort of try to tell you that joke, and they say, like mine will say, Daddy, why did the chicken cross the road? And I'll say, I don't know. And they'll suddenly shout, banana! And they'll run away laughing their heads off, and I'll be sitting there thinking, what just happened to me in that experience? And the reason is they're still learning story structure, right? They're still trying to understand all the different elements of story and how to use them and put them together, and they haven't quite mastered it yet. But good jokes do know that, right? Good jokes do understand the sort of structure of story, and they recognize that stories are these patterns that we've come to expect. And some of the best jokes will then interrupt or disrupt that pattern and sort of introduce the unexpected, and that sort of trips the mind into laughter and comedy. And this is essentially because the human brain is a pattern recognition machine, right? Our minds were designed to identify patterns or discrepancies in those patterns and sort of operate in that world, in that way. And way back when, you can imagine how useful this was as we were living on the plains and needed to identify the lion among the zebras, for example. It's very easy and quick for our brain to sort of quickly identify that break in the pattern. Today, hopefully, most of us aren't navigating such wild worlds, but we are navigating social worlds. We're navigating worlds in which we have to make decisions about the products we choose, the clothes we wear, the decisions that we make. And so we use that to sort of navigate our social world. We navigate these patterns and these sort of stories that we constantly are seeing and experiencing over and over again. If anyone shops at a grocery store regularly, and I'll often go with my wife, with the kids, and you'll see my wife walk through the grocery store and pick up things off the shelves and just drop them into the cart without seemingly much thought into it, right? And then there'll be those items that she picks up and she examines and she looks at and she checks the coupon booklet, things like that, to see if there's something there. You can see that there's a pattern and sort of a rhythm and almost a mindlessness to some products. And there are those products that sort of break that she doesn't have the story for, she doesn't have the narrative for. That sort of tell her, in the past, this has been a successful purchase, so I don't need to think much about it. And that's sort of the power in these stories, is that they sort of create these references for us. They create these lessons, if you will, that help us know what has happened in the past and what will most likely happen as a future or current event unfolds. Essentially, this is sort of what happens, right? So we're surrounded constantly by millions and billions of bits of data, and there's about 95% of that gets managed by our subconscious that we are completely unaware of, from the temperature in the room to the sound of my voice to, an itch on your elbow, things like that. These are things that you don't ever really think of. But then there's 5% of that data that you're consciously aware of, 5% of our thoughts that we're consciously aware of. And what happens is that the mind, in order to best understand what's happening around us, creates a narrative structure out of that data. It makes sense out of the data around us by organizing it into a sequential, orderly sort of storage structure. It's often, the example I'll give to my clients is why not to be in sort of a political discussion, right? You'll have one set of data interpreted very differently by Democrats compared to how it's interpreted by Republicans, because each of them are using very different narrative structures, but their mind is pulling from that same data source. And so they're still creating stories, but they're creating very different stories out of that data at the end of the day. And this is what the mind wants. And what's powerful about this, and powerful about this idea that the mind really wants to create a story, is that if you're a brand or you're managing your own identity in a marketplace, for example, or anything else, is that if you don't help craft a story around an idea, your consumers, your audience, the public at large will create a story around it because they want the story. They must have the story. And in some cases, it's a story that you don't necessarily want them to create. It's a story that isn't necessarily accurate to your original intention. And so that's why it's important for the clients I work with to understand that and to identify and recognize the stories that they're telling about their brands, and sometimes they're not telling them at all, and to sort of take the reins on that and start to craft those stories for their brands and for their products, so that they do have a bit more control, not only over positioning in a grocery store, over the price that they might set, but over the way that product is being sort of positioned in the mind of those consumers. Because if they've created their own story, we've got no control over that. But if we help give them that story, then we've got a little bit of influence over where it might fit into that mind, into the mind of that consumer audience. I'm going to take a quick second. Any thoughts, questions before I go on to the next section? I will take silence as no questions so that you don't have to unmute to tell me. But please feel free to jump in at any point. So there's some core story elements I tell my clients about. And those include conflicts, characters, and conclusions, beginnings, middles, and ends, right? All stories follow this sort of core basic structure. And I have some examples here for you, right? And I'm sure you've all heard of these, I hope. There is, for example, Little Red Riding Hood. And she has a character, she's got conflicts, and she's got conclusions or resolutions, right? Little Red Riding Hood desired something. She wanted to get to Grandma's house. There are obstacles in her path. There are conflicts on that path, right? The wolf. And there's things that she learned and applied in order to find success or a resolution. So she learned don't talk to strangers, don't trust the wolf in Grandma's clothing, that sort of thing, in order to find success. And these are sort of the tales that we've told for centuries. About lessons, about morals that we've wanted to share with others. The same in the movies that we play, like some cases now, $12 to go see, for example, Independence Day, which I think is probably the greatest movie ever made, and I'm sure you all agree. But there's the same story structure here, right? If the characters desire something, they want to, let me see here, survive an alien invasion. There's obstacles in their path, right? Aliens that are sort of covering Earth and threatening to destroy all of their major cities. And then a character applies learning and finds success. Will Smith learns to fly an alien spaceship, flies into a mothership. Somehow they've created a virus that overcomes, alien firewalls, and somehow the alien spaceship also has USB ports that were created in the U.S. And they plug that USB port in, and the mothership crashes, and all of the alien spaceships come down, and they find success, right? They kind of gain that success. Same thing in our personal histories. We have these narrative structures that we use. The U.S., for example, they desired something. They wanted to escape religious persecution. There were obstacles in their path to England and the king, and they applied learning and found success. They wrote the Declaration of Independence and essentially separated themselves entirely from the British system. Each of these sort of represent a narrative structure, and these structures are important and repetitive. If anyone here, like myself, watches shows like HGTV or TLC and those home improvement shows or those house hunting shows, you've probably been through that experience, right, where those shows essentially have the same narrative arc over and over and over again, and yet we love it. We watch it in 4-hour sittings, these shows, to just simply just sort of pass the time more than anything, engage our mind in the story, the thing that our mind loves most. And you've probably seen it, right, where the show starts and they're rehabbing the house, they're rehabbing the bedroom. All of a sudden, there's a pipe burst, and then they cut to commercial. And they come back from commercial, and they've got enough budget to fix the pipe, and they keep going. And the show continues, and suddenly they've run out of budget for the appliances, and they cut to commercial. And they come back, and suddenly the parents have given the kids an extra $3,000, and they're able to buy appliances, things like that. And these structures happen over and over again, right? And we sit there like children just absorbing these stories on these TV shows and just really sort of enjoying and engaging them. And there's a lot of research today that actually demonstrates that the sort of original thought people had, right, that TV rots the mind, actually isn't necessarily entirely true. The stories that are generated in these TV shows, and the more complex stories even, like shows like 24, Downton Abbey, actually turn the mind on, because the mind hears that story and switches in switches on and essentially sort of activates. And that's why a lot of people are now recommending you don't watch TV before bed, because the mind doesn't turn off. It actually gets energized by these stories, by these narratives that are on television. And so I hope you've probably all seen it by now. If not, you will at some point, right? There's a story arc that Jason introduced to me, which looks like this. And it's a way to analyze and create and sort of structure story. And as I mentioned, right, there's a beginning, there's a middle and end. There's characters, there's conflicts and conclusions, and it was all there. Now, we started using this at Brand Trust, and we found it was a little too academic for our clients. It was a little too sort of detailed for our clients. But we recognized there's sort of something basic here, right? There's something core to this idea. What we started introducing to our clients is that the kind of key elements there, and almost any story, is that there's a problem. There's why are we here in the first place. There's a middle, what did we do? And there's a solution, which sort of explains why it all mattered. And when you have those things, you're sort of on track to a right story, especially in a corporate environment. You're on track to the right kind of story. And if you broke it down further, what we explain to our clients is that there's a what, there's a so what, and there's a now what. And this is sort of the shortcut we help our clients use to understand that if you're answering these three questions, you're on track, right? You're starting to identify the key elements of story, which is essentially a character, there's conflict, and as Jason will tell you, there's transformation, right? There's something that has changed. There's been some shift from one state to another. And the best stories have that. We tell our clients that over and over and over again, right? But the best products help people transform. They help people shift. They help people change who they are or something about their life that was otherwise in tension or unsatisfying or what have you, right? There's a wonderful author named Donald Miller who wrote the book, I believe it's called 1,000 Miles in a Million Years. If not, it's 1,000,000 miles in 1,000 years. And he writes about living your life as a story. And one of the things he says is that no one pays $15 to go to the movies to watch a guy save money for a Volvo, right? It's just not an interesting narrative. It's not an interesting story because there's no real transformation there. If you were to watch that movie, you would see he saves money, he buys the Volvo, the end, and you walk out of the theater. People want to see the movies where there's a major transformation, where there's a major shift, right? There's a major sort of conflict or tension that needs to be resolved. So we watch movies about people saving their families, about saving the world, about finding true love and losing that love, that sort of thing, and getting it back again. It's to have those transformations where the characters themselves sort of take on a new lens and have new learning out of that. And we really sort of connect and bond with those characters and place ourselves in those movies because of that transformation. So for our clients, we essentially adapted the story arc and created one that we use that you can see is very similar, but it's sort of tweaked to be for the corporate environment. So same flow, same push, but instead we look at what is the objective, right, of the corporate story here. What is the objective you're trying to tell? What is the problem that the brand or the product or the company faced? What did you do, right? What happened? Was research conducted? Was products launched, that sort of thing? So what? What about the marketplace? What about the environment made that behavior important, right? Why is this so important that it happened? And then now what? How did it all sort of end? What's the big resolution? And then finally, as was part of that sort of core element and what Jason, I think, identifies in his story arc as sort of the transformation, right? The big transformation is the big idea for us. What's the one thing that your audience should remember in the story that you're trying to tell? And in most cases, it is some sort of element of transformation, is that sort of core transformation that you're trying to create. But it gets articulated in many different ways when it comes to a business environment. So if we're studying mobile phones or creating a story around mobile technology, for example, it might be the big idea is that families are actually drawn together based on the data by mobile technology, as opposed to sort of many people thought they were sort of separated, that you got your phone and you sort of went into your isolated little world and you stopped connecting with others. But the data was actually telling us the opposite. And so there was a powerful story for us to tell because there was a transformation, there was a change, there was a shift in state, a shift in mind, if you will, of the kind of story that we needed to tell. So that's sort of a big overview of our sort of storytelling approach and philosophy at Brand Trust. And we're starting to take this now, and I'm starting to push this now, and hopefully the dissertation will help, is to understanding how we can kind of take that further even into the marketing process. And if you don't know about marketing or maybe you have some experience, you know that there's sort of an exercise that big companies go through of figuring out what their product is, what its benefits are, what its emotional reward is, what its rational reward is, things like that, and they use that to what they call position the product, right? To position that brand in the marketplace. And positioning is an exercise that was created, I think at this point about 40 years ago now, in the 60s, maybe 70s, I can't remember the exact date, and it was essentially based on 5 questions that were similar to story structure, but weren't necessarily sort of driven by story structure. And so I'm looking to see if there's a way to sort of use story structure to actually reinvent or revamp the positioning process, to revamp the marketing process, where instead of just simply positioning, kind of almost isolated from an environment, from a marketplace, is that if we were to look at and understand the story in that marketplace and understand our role in that marketplace, whether we're a prop, we're an actor, whether we are a sidekick or a hero, is that if we can understand that, can brands actually market themselves better? Can they connect to their consumers in a better way, in a deeper way? And will achieving or accomplishing or understand that not only help those brands, but also, I'm hoping, help consumers better understand how to use these products in their life, better understand their relationship to the objects that they're consuming at the end of the day. So that's the main content I have. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, and kind of jump into any discussion.
Kristian, this is Janet Randall in Dallas, Texas.
Hi, Janet.
I'm a second-year student in the media psychology program. What background did you bring to your media psychology program? Did you come from a marketing background?
Yeah, so my undergraduate degree was in communication sciences, and I worked in marketing for, I guess, about 6 or 7 years before I began the program. And entered the program through my company. I've been doing it full-time and doing the very crazy thing as well of raising 2 children at the same time. And that's what I brought to it. So I've always had a marketing lens or a marketing perspective of it all.
Because I did not come to the program from a media or a marketing or psychology background. And the more I am listening to the storytelling and the courses I've taken with Jason, it seems like we're really doing marketing when we're talking about storytelling. I mean, you know, they all seem to come together: communications, marketing. I
mean, I could certainly see where you might go down that path. I would probably broaden it to think of marketing in an even broader sense from commercial ventures, right? Is that storytelling for me, and the way I saw it, the way I interpret it, is that it's really about sharing ideas, about getting ideas from one mind into another. And I'll tell my clients that the best hack that we have into the human brain is storytelling. Is that if you're trying to get an idea into someone else's head, you need to tell a story. It's sort of like having that sort of skeleton key that opens the door. And so whether that's for products and your marketing products, that sort of thing, or you're just simply trying to teach your kids a lesson about sharing, the story is probably the best way to go about it. It's probably the most effective way to go about it, and the most effective way to influence people. There's some wonderful research being done by a body of scientists about what's known as narrative transportation. And it's this idea that when you enter a story, you essentially leave reality and completely immerse yourself in the world of that story. And when you're in the world of that story, you essentially abandon all of the rationalizations you had in the real world. And so what happens is that you're much more likely to be influenced inside of a story than outside of a story. And that's why the best salespeople, the best teachers teach through story. Because if you need to change a mind, you want to bring someone into the story, away from sort of their preconceived ideas, their preconceived notions, and into the world of that story.
So at Brand Trust, you use storytelling mainly to work with your clients in order for the clients to tell the consumer their story. Do you use storytelling also to get data from, use the consumer's story, what the stories they're telling, in order to then find out what you might be telling, what you should be telling them?
Yes, we actually do more of that than the former.
Okay.
So we help clients understand the consumer story, and they try to market it. And I think that the gap has been that we've understood the consumer story, but they've been marketing still in a very traditional sense, and not necessarily marketing through story. And there's a lot of brands that are really successful at marketing through story. Nike, for example, is wonderful at it. Apple has wonderful stories behind it. But the people that run those brands aren't always necessarily thinking of story. They sort of fall onto it accidentally, as opposed to realizing how powerful the narrative is for that brand.
Okay.
Any others? Any
Yeah.
questions?
Other questions? Okay. By the way, Janet, you might be interested in a book by Dan Pink. It's a pretty prolific author called To Sell is Human.
Yeah.
And he basically says every time we open our mouths, we're trying to sell somebody something. We just can't help ourselves. And the people that tend to succeed tell stories. Sometimes they can be really quick stories. And this feeds beautifully into not this week, but next week, where you'll go over story structures from my book, and and we'll look at a couple of different approaches to structuring a story. In each case, at the heart of it is some kind of transformation. I don't care whether it's a 10-second ad during which somebody realizes their armpits smell and they need deodorant, or it's just without it, it's just a list of events, and there is no emotional hook for us. And so you'll have, I've changed the course a bit, Kristian. They only do one piece of media. They spend more time talking to people like you, which I think makes more sense.
I don't know if you guys have experienced the same thing. Maybe it's just because I'm taking this course, but everywhere I just keep hearing the word story. Story here, story here. I mean, it's everywhere now. Is this like the new thing, or did I?
It's overused, or it's widely used, or I would love to hear what others think about this. But I mean, you turn on the news, and now let's turn to details of the story. Right. And so
Right.
what's your story and so on? I think there's a point at which we sort of pull back from that. And we say, as students of story, we're looking at the essential elements and structure that sort of underlies all that stuff so that we can take it and adapt it to our professional practice, which I think Kristian is an excellent example of.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. I mean, in the industry itself, we've seen story as it's the big thing everyone's talking about, and everyone's doing some form of storytelling training or offering some sort of story thing at the conferences and things like that. I think you're absolutely right. It's overused, it's abused in many cases, and it's just a really popular idea right now, and I'm happy it is. But I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of not a lot of cream to sort of skim from all of the milk, if you will, that's being talked about it. There's a very small percentage of what I think is truly sort of story and storytelling.
I was working with the NEA, 2.7 million members, and with their PR people at one point, and they're much maligned because they really don't know how to tell a story. This is many years ago, and they said, our next campaign is about the fact that kids go to school on an empty stomach and they can't learn. And I said, so show me what you're going to do. They pulled out a bunch of pie charts, and I just looked at them and I said, you guys, we're going to tell the story of Juan, who wants to be a doctor. And he can't be a doctor because he can't learn because he's hungry. And then bring in the data. So I just came back from McKee's workshop, and he really slammed data. And I think I think he's got that one wrong, but you don't lead with data. You lead with the story. And then once people are inside the tent, if you've got some facts that are important to them in their particular, sector of the economy, then I think that they're much more open to hearing them and probably need to hear them.
Yeah. There's the wonderful quote from the Heath brothers who said, a credible idea makes people believe, an emotional idea makes people care, but the right story makes people act. And I think it sort of falls in line with that. And there's sort of that there's a wonderful speaker. He has a number of TED Speak talks called Hans Rosling.
Oh yeah, he's fabulous.
He's considered the ESPN sportscaster of data. And that's a question I get from clients a lot who do a lot of quantitative research as opposed to qualitative research. You say it's easy to sort of, in a qualitative interview, identify a story and tell a story about that person. But if they're gathering data from huge populations and very quantitative in nature, how do you tell a story there? And I tell them actually that the data stories are probably better stories than those qualitative stories, but you have to find the story within it. You can't just present the data. And that's where a lot of people fall short, is they present the data, and that's it. And they don't find the story. And Hans Rosling is amazing.
As a matter of fact, I will post a link to some of his stuff. You're quite right to point that out. I mean, he tells a story of over 200 years, looking at the rise in wealth and the rise in health. And boy, that could be deadly. I mean, just listening to, can't you just see a bunch of pie graphs and so on? But he tells it, he performs it as a story. He tells the story of that 200 years, and it's absolutely captivating.
Yeah.
Do you do any work, Kristian, in the political arena where you deal with political campaigns that, as they go on, you're counterpointing, basically this, telling a story and then being attacked and then changing your story, where it's a dynamic process during the campaign?
We haven't done work for political campaigns. I certainly analyze it and critique it, as I'm sure everyone else does. It's really because, and I don't mean to, portray any sort of political preference, right? But Obama's original campaign had such a clear story to it, which is, I think, what made it so powerful and believable. Whether or not you think it worked or he worked or anything like that, the campaign itself was a really sort of clear narrative that he was telling, versus perhaps his narrative today, and even the narrative of the competitors that he ran against, whose narratives are really fractured and things like that. So you can see that, and you can see those campaigns. In most cases, the folks that are most memorable are the ones that are telling the clearest narrative, because it's the narrative that people remember, not necessarily the details of that narrative.
Anybody else? Okay, Kristian, have you signed up for the QEs? Sorry, you guys. Just a little bit of administrivia here. Okay. Well, let's make sure you've done that.
No, I have. I believe I am ready. I am working towards it, but I've been working towards it for many months now. So I'm sure the leave committee that keeps granting me now are tired of hearing me ask for my leave. Well, but no, it is coming, and I've been making actually some really great progress over the last few months.
Have you registered for it?
Not this semester.
Okay. All right. Okay. We need to address that, but we can do that offline here. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. And in the next 3 minutes, I'll put the Hans Rosling link up on our website under week number 5. And by all means, this is one, when I speak, and there are 1,000 people in the audience, I show this one, and I show it from a different perspective, sort of, and that is that we need to expand the notion of literacy to include performance and visuals and so on and so forth, and he just brings that all together so well. So that'll be up in a few minutes. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Well, have a great evening.
All right, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.